Hi, everybody. In this video, I want to tackle an age-old problem. Should we be completely honest, bluntly, brutally honest, or should we be tactful and diplomatic? Which one is it? Is there a choice? Can we be both? I'm Bruce Lambert from HowCommunicationWorks.com. Let's get started. So in my last video, I reviewed this email that Charles Krauthammer, the former columnist for the Washington Post, sent to a friend who had died or who had been injured in an accident. It was a beautiful email. But Charles Krauthammer died last week, and a lot of people have been posting things about him in social media. And so a famous quotation by Krauthammer was posted on Twitter that I read. I'll put it up on screen, but I'll just read it here. It said, You're betraying your whole life if you don't say what you think, and you don't say it honestly and bluntly. So this reminds me of Ray Dalio, who I made a video about before, who says we should practice radical honesty, radical transparency. And that's what I want to talk about today. Is that a good idea? Is that good advice for communicators? And the short answer is no. I think this is terrible advice. And for the reasons that I want to explain. There are multiple reasons. I think the first one is if you follow this advice, you are going to harm yourself. You're going to lose relationships. You're going to suffer negative professional consequences. If you learn tact and diplomacy, this is the essence of social skill. People will trust you. They will want to be around you. It's not like they'll trust you to borrow their car, or they'll trust you to watch their money or their daughter or something like that. But it's that they will trust you that you are a safe person to interact with. When each of us enters into an interaction, it's an inherently risky proposition. Any of us could be humiliated, embarrassed, ashamed, and lose face in any interaction. So one thing that we evaluate every time we interact with someone is, are they safe to interact with? And one of the main bases that we use to decide whether people are safe to interact with is, will they cooperate with us in avoiding humiliation, and cooperate with us in saving face? And someone who is brutally honest, who believes that being honest is the most important thing, that person is not safe to interact with under most circumstances. They don't care about my feelings. They don't care about me being humiliated or losing face. They don't care about humiliating other people that we might be interacting with. These people are not safe to be around in a personal or professional situation. They lack tact. They lack poise. They lack diplomacy. These things are desirable. But there's a tension. I'm not denying that there's a tension, or I'm not denying that there's value in honesty. Ideally, we want to be honest with people. And I think that it's through being honest and vulnerable and authentic, whatever that means, that we build relationships, that we build intimacy. So I think that honesty is essential for growing relationships and for growing intimacy. So I don't want you to hear what I'm saying as saying, don't be honest. I'm saying, don't be blunt. Don't be brutally honest. The brutal part is what I'm worried about. The blunt part is what I'm worried about. And I'm especially worried that people who may be struggling with their communication skills, who may be just learning to polish their communication skills, will hear famous people like Charles Krauthammer, who was this incredibly gifted communicator, will hear him say, be blunt and be totally honest. Or they'll hear Ray Dalio, who's a billionaire, this incredibly successful businessman. They'll hear him say, be radically honest, radically transparent. And they'll run around being honest and blunt and radically transparent and brutally honest, and they're going to ruin all their relationships. I don't want that to happen to you. I don't want you to be brutally honest and go out there and ruin your career or ruin your relationships. And I think that is a real risk. Bluntness and brutal honesty are not generally looked upon favorably in social interaction. And I'm encouraging what? Tact, diplomacy, social skill, which means being able to tell the truth, but being able to do so in a way that doesn't humiliate other people or damage them. Doing so, using communication to create psychological safety so that we can say things that are face-threatening. So what I'm suggesting is tact, which is the opposite of bluntness. It's not the opposite of honesty. So tact and diplomacy and social skill are not the opposite of honesty. But I think there's a misperception, and some people think that that is the truth. I think some people believe that if we too carefully design the things that we say, if we think too carefully about what to say and how to say it, if we use too much tact, if we come indirectly to certain topics, that we're being disingenuous, or that we're even lying, or that we're engaged in manipulation. So I think these are incorrect perceptions, but I really want to hear from you, because I think people disagree about stuff like this. Some people believe that any use of indirectness, or any use of tact or careful language, or anytime we choose our words carefully in order not to hurt other people's feelings, in order not to embarrass them publicly or humiliate them or discourage them or dishearten them, that somehow we're being dishonest. I don't believe that's true. I think in many situations, both personally and professionally, they require honesty. We can't achieve important goals in business and in personal relationships unless we can be honest with one another. And sometimes the things we have to say to one another are difficult. They are intrinsically face-threatening, meaning the content of what we have to say, if you understand it correctly, is hurtful, right? I have to criticize you. I have to call into question your competence, or your attractiveness, or something that you value deeply about your personality, your skill, or your talent. And sometimes, especially in a professional setting, we have to offer criticism to people that we work with. And it's very challenging to do, because the content, the truthful content that we have to get across is intrinsically threatening to someone else's self-image or face or pride or self-esteem. What I think Dalio and even Krauthammer are saying in some respect is we can't be so indirect, or we can't care so much about people's feelings that we don't tell them the truth about how we feel, or about their own performance, for example. So I'm saying, yes, tell the truth. But I'm saying don't do so bluntly. To do so bluntly disregards the reality of people's feelings, the reality of embarrassment, the reality of shame, of humiliation. These things are very real. They are every social interaction that we enter, we run the risk of humiliation, of being ashamed, of being embarrassed, of losing face, of damaging our reputation. That's why so many of us are anxious about social situations, because we perceive this risk. We're not wrong to perceive this risk. This risk is real. So the only way we feel comfortable going into social interactions is if we know other people have tact, have some sense of diplomacy, that they have a moral commitment not to allow us to be humiliated, and not to intentionally humiliate us, and that moral commitment is reciprocal. I have that moral commitment to the other people that I interact with, and I expect them to have that commitment to me. And I call it a moral commitment because there's so much at stake. This commitment is really deeply personal and important, and humiliation, shame, embarrassment, loss of reputation, these are deeply significant things to us as human beings. We're so emotionally attached to the face that we present to the world that if we lose face and become ashamed, it's a grievous thing. So the commitment not to shame other people, not to embarrass them, not to humiliate them in public, even in a one-on-one situation, is a moral commitment. And someone who is committed to being bluntly honest or brutally honest has abandoned that moral commitment. And I don't think that's something we want to do. I think that's a commitment that as moral people, we want to uphold. And if you want to be trusted as someone who is safe to interact with, someone that other people want to be around, then you must not be brutally honest. So how do we then say the difficult things that we have to say? We use tact. We learn to use language to create psychological safety. So let me just give you a couple of examples of where brutal honesty I think is totally inappropriate. Now, the first one I thought of is in the medical context. So let's imagine that a doctor has to break bad news to a patient. And the classic form of bad news is a doctor having to tell a patient that they've been diagnosed with cancer or some other fatal disease. Let's just take cancer. So if we listen to Ray Dalio, or if we listen to Charles Krauthammer, who says, you're betraying your whole life if you don't say what you think and you don't say it honestly and bluntly, So if a doctor thinks Charles Krauthammer is their hero, they come in to see that patient, they close the door, they sit down, and they say, "You've got cancer. The tumor's huge. We cannot operate on it. In fact, me and the radiologist, we gasped when we saw how big that tumor was. You're finished. The prognosis is terrible. You'll be lucky if you live 6 weeks. We agreed this is one of the biggest tumors we've ever seen." So that's all blunt and brutally honest. They may actually think those things. They may actually have sat, the radiologist and the oncologist may have sat in the room together thinking, "Oh my God, this guy is toast." But what if the doctor then comes into you, because it's honest, says, "You're toast. That tumor is huge. We were scared to death. I'm glad it's you and not me. That's the first thing I thought when I looked at that x-ray. I'm glad it's you and not me." Right? These are all thoughts we're thinking. And to follow Ray Dalio or Charles Krauthammer, we should just say them because we're thinking them and we want to be true to ourselves. So we just say bluntly what we're thinking. This is horrible advice. Really, the worst communicators follow this kind of advice. So what do you want to do in that sort of situation? You do need to tell the person that they have cancer. That's your obligation as a doctor. If you leave that interaction with the patient and you haven't told them that they have cancer because you're too afraid to hurt their feelings, you've abandoned another commitment, which is your commitment to tell them the truth about their condition. So what you have to do is use tact, create psychological safety. Maybe give them a shot across the bow, a warning, say something. "We've looked at your x-rays and I'm afraid we have terrible news. This is going to be very, very difficult to hear, and I hate to be the one who has to break it to you. But the radiologist and I both agree that what we see on the images is that you have cancer, and it's a very serious cancer, and the diagnosis is very grave." So this is just as truthful, but it's not blunt. It's not brutal. So we can be honest and still care about people's feelings. But in order to do that, we have to use language to create this psychological safety, to communicate the other things that we care about you, that we're going to, if you're a doctor and a patient, we're going to continue to take the best care of you that we can. We're going to keep you comfortable. We're going to do everything we can to help you. We're going to be here for you to experience the fear and uncertainty that accompanies this diagnosis and so on. All of that is about having a moral commitment to the other person's well-being and not just some abstract commitment to truth, regardless of the consequences. So this idea about the consequences is another key idea, I think. So when we're communicating, instead of having this blanket commitment to the idea, I'm going to be honest all the time, when I think about communication, I think about it strategically. In other words, I think about effectiveness as what I'm mostly trying to maximize. So when I go into a communication situation, I ask myself, what is the goal? What am I trying to achieve with communication here? And then I try to say and do the things that will help me achieve that goal. I'm a rational person. I try to do the things that I think will help me achieve my goals. And I view communication in terms of rational goals. So if we think about effectiveness, it's very rare that blunt and brutal honesty is going to achieve the goals that we want, unless the goal is to offend the other person, or to shock them, or to stun them, or to impress them with our brutality or our blunt honesty. And occasionally, I'll be honest, sometimes that's the goal. Sometimes we want to hurt people's feelings, or we want to shock them, or we want to stun them with our blunt brutality. But in most situations, that isn't the goal. In most personal relationships and in most professional settings, we have other goals, and blunt brutality will not achieve those goals. So that's the reason to avoid it. I'll give you another example. So let's imagine that someone, your a close friend, let's say a romantic partner, let's say this. So let's say you're out on a date, and you're thinking that you're attracted to this person and that you'd like to go back to your place and have sex with them. That's what you're thinking. That's the honest truth. You've had a date with this person, maybe you've had a couple of dates, and you're really sexually attracted to the person, and you want to go home and have sex with them. Maybe you want to have sex with them all night. Maybe you're thinking of all the things you want to do with them sexually. So, again, if we follow Ray Dalio, if we follow Charles Krauthammer, what do? Right there at dinner, let's just tell them, I want to go home and have sex with you. These are all the things I want to do with your body and mind, and you say in blunt and brutal detail all the things you want to do. Good luck with that. I suppose under some circumstances that could work if you're with exactly the right person and they feel mutually. But I think a lot of the times, your date is going to excuse themselves to go to the bathroom and not come back. I'll give you one more example. So what do you do in that? I'll come back to this example where you're attracted to someone. There's lots of other indirect ways of showing your attraction, of inviting them home and letting them make the inference that you're interested in them sexually rather than saying it bluntly. Now, there's room for confusion. It gets into issues of consent. Eventually, we need to sort of be honest with one another, maybe when we're in private. Let me give you one more example professionally. So imagine that you're in a professional situation and you see someone give a presentation and they come to you afterwards and they ask how the presentation was. And your honest opinion, and let's say there's someone who works for you and who you're trying to develop, but they give a presentation and your honest opinion was, it was terrible. It was boring. They lost their train of thought. They didn't realize everyone started to look at their phone. Their slides had way too many words. You couldn't hear their voice. They were hiding behind the podium. They just did everything wrong. That person comes and asks for your opinion. So the Ray Dalio, Charles Krauthammer, brutal, honest approach would be, you were terrible. You hid behind the podium. All your slides had too many words. Everyone was bored. I was bored. I was embarrassed for you. I was cringing the whole time. I couldn't wait for it to be over. It was one of the worst presentations I've ever seen, right? All of that's the truth. You may be thinking all those things, but if we think in terms of effectiveness, is that really going to achieve our goal? Ultimately, they need to know what was wrong with their performance. They need to know that their slides had too many words, that they hid behind the podium, that they didn't speak loudly enough, that the content was boring. They need to know that, or else they can't improve. So here's the part about honesty that I agree with, that I think any sensible person would agree with. When we offer criticism, for example, there has to be some honesty in it, or else people can't modify their behavior in the way they need to, especially if we're in a position to evaluate others at work. They need to understand their evaluation so that they can improve. But again, to do so bluntly and brutally harms people. And if you ask yourself, if the effect you're trying to have is to encourage someone to improve and to give someone the courage and the determination and the confidence to try again, to improve their performance, then you've got to be more supportive than that. You can't just be blunt and brutal. Brutality frightens people. It hurts people. And so if you've encountered blunt and brutal criticism, the one thing you probably want to do is never give a presentation again, because the consequence was you have to face this blunt and brutal criticism. If we can use language to contextualize the criticism and let people know that we value them, we value the effort, we can normally find something good about their performance, and then we can say, but there were other areas where you needed improvement, and let's go over them. And maybe you do that in private, maybe you do that after they've had time to come down from the anxiety of the presentation, and so on. So I think these examples reveal why you can't always be brutally honest. It just won't achieve your goals. There's a famous poem by, I thought I had it. Oh, there it is. So there's a famous poem by Emily Dickinson, who's one of my favorite poets, a beloved American poet. And she talks about telling the truth. And she's such a good judge of human nature, I wanted to read it to you. So she says, "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. Too bright for our infirm delight, the truth's superb surprise. As lightning till the children eased, with explanation kind, the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind." I think that's so beautiful. It so perfectly captures what I'm trying to say. I've taken 12 minutes or something to say it. Emily Dickinson says it in like 10 lines. Let's take that apart just a little bit. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. So that's what she's saying. Tell the truth, but not bluntly and brutally. Tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. Circuit, indirectness, be circuitous, she's saying. Too bright for our infirm delight, the truth's superb surprise. It's too bright, it's too stunning, it's too shocking, it's too harmful, the truth's superb surprise. That's why we don't want to be blunt and brutal. And then she gives an analogy. As lightning to the children eased with explanation kind. So a kind explanation to children eases their fear of lightning. The truth must dazzle gradually. Gradually we have to tell people the truth, or every man be blind. And so she's saying, every man be blind. There will be tremendous harm. The truth will cause us tremendous harm. The metaphor and analogy she uses, or every man be blind. That blunt truth is so bright and damaging, it's blinding. But blinding to our ego, right? Damaging, humiliating, making us be ashamed, and so on and so forth. So I just want to give a couple more thoughts and then I'll wrap this up. I know I've gone on for a long time, but I think this topic keeps coming up and it's central to a lot of what I say because I think this is just a critical tension, telling the truth or maintaining your relationships. This tension never goes away in communication, and being skillful in communication is mostly about learning to manage this tension, learning to say difficult things in a way that preserves relationships and maintains psychological safety, does not shame or humiliate the people we're communicating with, and preserves our reputation as a person who's trustworthy to interact with, who can be counted on not to humiliate us. If we develop the reputation as blunt or brutally honest, I'm telling you, this is not a reputation you really want to develop. Most people will avoid you. You won't get promoted. Romantic partners won't want to be around you, and so on and so forth. So let's talk a little bit more about, does it mean we are being inauthentic if we are indirect or if we care about people's feelings? No. Authenticity is sort of about being true to ourselves and being a true expression of ourselves. That does not mean saying everything we think. I challenge you sometimes to say everything that you think. Or just write it down. Don't do it in front of everybody. And think of how really honestly say everything you think. Imagine if people could read your minds and how terrifying that would be if people knew all of your thoughts. So authenticity does not mean transparently saying everything we think. Authenticity means somehow letting our behavior be a true expression of ourselves. And so if you yourself are someone who cares about other people, cares about how they feel, cares about them not being ashamed or humiliated in social situations, then authenticity necessarily requires you to be tactful. I suppose if you are an evil person, or if you are a cruel person and you like seeing other people suffer, if you are a sadist and you like seeing other people suffer, then being authentic, brutal honesty would be authentic to your true self. But I think so few of us are like that. Most of us are just kind and decent people trying to get through the world, make friends, and live our lives the best we can. And authenticity means living up to our own values. And most of us value kindness. And brutal honesty is just the opposite of that. And there's also this issue, are we being manipulative? If we're careful about what we say, are we being manipulative? Look, everything we say has effects on people. If we're brutally honest, we're designing our words to shock people, right? So that's manipulative. If we're tactful, we're designing our words to ease the impact of our words on people. Both strategies, brutal honesty and tactful indirectness, are designed to produce a particular effect in another person. So both are equally manipulative. It's not as if brutal honesty is not manipulative. It's manipulating you in one way to hurt you, to shock you, and tactful indirectness is manipulating you another way. And neither one of them, the word manipulation is so pejorative. It's as if we're doing something really bad and shameful. But it's just, we are designing language to achieve goals. This is not manipulation. This is how language works. Language is strategic. We design it to achieve, or we design what we say to achieve goals. I guess if you insist on seeing that as manipulative, I'll live with that. I just say language is strategic and we use it rationally to achieve our goals. And there's nothing to be ashamed of about that. And in no way are we being inauthentic when we are being indirect or tactful. So there's one more thing I wanted to touch on, and we'll come back to this in other videos, this idea of vulnerability and honesty. I do think to build intimacy in relationships, you need to be vulnerable. You need to be honest about yourself. So if there's one place where I think you can be really honest, It's often about your own faults. Be honest about your own faults. Be honest about your own struggles. Be honest about your own weaknesses, your own fears. This kind of honesty reveals vulnerability. And this brings people closer to you. Because if you could be honest about your own fears, anxieties, trepidations, worries, your own sources of shame or whatever it is, this is vulnerability, and this will draw people to you. They will then be willing to maybe reveal something about themselves, and this mutual self-disclosure will bring you closer together. So if you really are craving being honest, or if you think that honesty is the key to authenticity and so on, I say be honest about yourself. If you want to be bluntly critical of yourself, but not of other people. It's unkind. So that's it. Do not follow this advice from Charles Krauthammer about blunt honesty. Do not follow this advice from Ray Dalio about radical transparency. Not unless you also have the skill to create psychological safety for other people. Otherwise, you're going to be a pariah and people won't want to be around you. You are going to hurt other people in ways which I don't think you intend to do. So that's all I have on radical honesty versus tact. I hope you enjoy this kind of video. If you do, I make lots of other videos, and I have a blog at howcommunicationworks.com. I hope you will like this video and consider subscribing to our channel to come back and watch more videos. Leave me a comment down below and let me know what you think of tact versus honesty. Maybe you think I've gotten it wrong. Maybe I have gotten it wrong in some respects. This is a complicated topic. I would love to hear from you. So come on over to howcommunicationworks.com, sign up for our mailing list, and we'll notify you every time we post a new video. Subscribe here and turn on notifications. You can find out about it that way. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.